I didn't know what to expect going into this. We often hear, the empowerment coach. I think you demonstrated yourself in a way that your story and your mission and the life that you bring really just captivated myself. I'm not one to be captivated easily and to be vulnerable in the sense of being emotional too often. Usually my time is captured in one place or another, and I try to switch often. But your video there was something about you that just mesmerized. And I mean that in the most wonderful sense of being from a place of something that happened that wasn't expected, being in a corporate career of 20 years, leadership position in a tech company, which is already competitive, high stress, high level. I mean, you got to have wit, you got to be determined on that front. Also having a beautiful, wonderful family. And then something through your story that was shaken. Mind Valley and Vision, which I refer to this a lot, we call it Satori and Kensho moments. I don't know if you're familiar. So it's the Japanese style of a sense of suffering. Satori moments are a place of immediate shaking up for the most growth and the quickest growth. Kensho moments are long, drawn out. It's a slow burn, just feeling of maybe it's without purpose, without a life that you wanted. And it's just a feeling of stuck, not unsure. But through you decided this is not going to bring me down. Maybe a few times, but ultimately you said, this is not. I'm going to rise above. I'm going to be an absolute for myself, for my family, whatever you want, within your personal journey, with your personal faith, bring you to that place of just determination.
Yeah, it was thank you. First of all, I'm so humbled by your words and how you reacted when you watched the introductory video, which I feel is really true to myself and my story. But it was it was a shocking sensation to lose control over my body and really have that sensation of, you take for granted that your brain is going to send signals and your body will move accordingly, taking a step forward, sitting down, wiggling your fingers, wiggling your toes, going throughout 1.5 million tiny motions that we go through every single day. And like many people, I had taken that movement for granted. And so I had a virus, and then what happened is I just experienced, the best that I can describe it is just a profound weakness that started in my lower body and my ankles and was working its way up each day. And I started to have to hold on to furniture to move around the house, and just sort of felt like my legs were going to give out from under me. And I was even dropping glasses because I wasn't able to grasp the cup.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to say, yes, the overall, this experience was a spiritual growth for me, and it was an incredible turning point in my life. But at that moment, when it was first happening, I was in utter denial. The day that I went to the ER when I could no longer stand on my own, I was working that morning. I was on conference calls.
Mm-hmm.
And it was difficult for me to come to grips with what was happening to my body. And I knew it wasn't right. I knew I needed to get to the hospital, but I was afraid to really fully open my eyes to the potential diagnosis and what was happening, and really admitting that I was in a state of paralysis where I could barely move.
It's funny, isn't it, how detached we become from our bodies on a regular daily basis, and we just think, oh, I'm going through the motions, and I'm gonna do this thing. And even something as simple as hunger signals and satiety, it's just like, no, I've got control of this, right? And so I don't have time for this. I'll deal with it later, I think is the mantra for so many people. And it just finally, ultimately, when we have things go wrong with our bodies decide, no, I think you need to do this now. Right.
Oh yes, absolutely. There was no no bargaining with my body, no negotiation at that point in time. And I really just had to surrender to it. And by the time I went to the hospital, I was having trouble speaking and even chewing as that paralysis starts to work its way up the body. And we knew that it was very urgent to get to the hospital because many patients who experience what I was experiencing end up having to be intubated, and their muscles in the lungs are not able to respond to be able to take breaths and breathe, of the body's own accord. Extremely scary. And it was right at the beginning of the pandemic. And so my husband was not able to accompany me inside the hospital. And so I was in a wheelchair and I'm sitting in the ER waiting to be called. And they're telling me they're going to take me back for a spinal tap and all of these really scary procedures that I'd never done before. And I was on my own, during this time. And I just remember being a feeling of panic as I was lying in the hospital bed, and I was not able to reach over and press the button to get a nurse. So ultimately, through that battery of tests, I was diagnosed with Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is a debilitating neurological condition where the coating around the nerves in the body become damaged. And usually it's caused by, in my case, a virus that happened leading up to this. And the body thinks it's still fighting the virus, but in actuality, it's fighting itself and damaging the coating around the nerves that enables those signals to come through. And I felt like I had been dropped into the body of a 95-year-old woman overnight. I could barely move, and I could lift my hands up just a few inches. And but my doctors were telling me it could be up to 3 years for me to fully recover from this episode. And my body, in essence, had forgotten how to walk. It was not just weakness, like I'll, feel better after I get some rest and I'll just give this some time. It's literally the body does not know how to walk, how to lift the feet up. And so I was having to relearn those movements.
And
those connections were just lost.
Yeah. And it's amazing. Correct me if I'm wrong, but Guillain-Barré is an autoimmune condition, right?
Yes, it is.
Did you ever have, I know it seemed almost overnight, but there were symptoms leading up to it.
Mm-hmm.
How long did those last? And then I guess my other question is, do they understand what caused it? You said it was a virus, but yeah, I'm just curious.
Yes. So this was right at the beginning of the pandemic, and I believe what I had was COVID, but there were no tests available during that time. It was so early on. So even the hospital didn't have any tests. Mm-hmm. And so I was having all of the classic symptoms, the shortness of breath, the severe fever, body aches, all of those types of things. I was tested for flu, which was negative, and I went to the hospital with shortness of breath. And the doctor said, look, I think you have COVID, but your lungs look fairly good. I think you can recover at home. And so I did go home and thankfully was able to recover there. And I was just thinking, I'm just going to recover from this virus and I'm going to feel better. And so part of the symptoms that were happening really was that weakness that started coming on. That was truly the primary symptom. But I was so confused because COVID at that time was still being studied, still being understood. Italy at that time was the hotbed. And because this was in March of 2020. And so I thought this weakness was a residual from COVID. And so I thought that it was just taking me a really long time to get over it. And finally I called the doctor and I said, look, is this normal that I'm feeling this big weakness? And they said, you need to go to the neurologist. And I did make the appointment, but it turns out I couldn't wait for that appointment before I needed to go to the hospital beforehand. But it was really that profound weakness was the symptom.
Okay. Had you ever had any like autoimmune issues before that?
I had tested borderline on a couple, Sjogren's syndrome and borderline earlier in my life. And I had also had Lyme disease
Okay.
when I was in my early 30s as well, although there was no connection through the course of this journey that truly connected the two. But I had a history of longer term Lyme disease with some neurological side effects with that.
Okay.
As a bit of preview, Julie also has an autoimmune. So with her curiosity, she's bringing up these little quite important underlying questions to get.
Because once you have an autoimmune condition, you're a much more likely candidate for others, of course, because your immune system is already somewhat compromised, which is why I ask. I also know that Guillain-Barré is a side effect of not only has been connected as a side effect of not only COVID, but also the vaccine. I know a couple of people who've ended up with it as a result of the vaccine. So I was just, as much for our listeners' interest, as much as personal curiosity, because, how do these things come about, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as we said, if we ignore the things our body is telling us, and we don't, but again, our medical system doesn't really it isn't set up to deal with that. I have these vague symptoms. Well, go home and come back when they're more serious, right?
Exactly. Especially fatigue or weakness. I mean, it's just, you can't get more general, I mean, it's difficult to get a handle on that and understand what those really mean.